Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Creation Reformation YouTube channel. This is a quicker video. The last video that I put out was over a week ago, actually, and it was the longest video on the channel, clocking in at almost 3 hours. So wanted to put out a much shorter one. But as we reach kind of the middle, almost the middle of January, just wanted to uh, shout out my audience, shout out you guys for coming back and checking out the channel. We just hit 100 subscribers, so that's pretty exciting. Just a few months into the channel. Good to see it getting a little bit of recognition out there, and pretty satisfied with the viewership that we're getting here at Creation Reformation. We're a small movement based in the New England area, but excited to be able to have a little bit of an audience to build off of as we try and bring the creation movement here to the Northeast. So here's kind of just a look at the YouTube channel that you are currently on. If you want more material that's not videos that you want to read over at the Creation Reformation newengland.com website. We do have a blog. New blog article came out this past week, came out on January 5th, titled Three Lessons I've Learned from Creation Science, which is kind of based off of a quicker seminar that I give at chapels, sometimes at schools, where I just talk about some things I've learned going to conferences, doing scientific research in the creation science world. So go ahead and read that. That's 3 lessons that I've learned, so you can kind of see what it's like to kind of be a part of the creation science movement. But for this video, wanted to bring attention to a new blog article that came out from NewCreation blog, where I am a writer over there. You'll see a lot of my articles appear in NewCreation, but I want to go through an article that's not by me. It's actually by Hannah Klein, who usually writes our astronomy or cosmology articles. But we wanted to start off the new year with kind of an announcement over at NewCreation blog, which is basically that we're going to be subtly shifting what we call ourselves. We're not no longer creationists. We're still creationists. We're still young Earth creationists, but we're going to start calling ourselves, at least over at the NewCreation blog, young age creationists. For a few subtle reasons, and that the term is already out there. A lot of creation scientists are already using it to describe themselves, and Hannah kind of brings us through a bunch of different reasons why we might want to switch up our name. So just want to dive into the article for our shorter video today. She says, Young Earth Creationism. The term is a mouthful, isn't it? It's one of those descriptive names that needs enough terms to encompass all of the nuances of its definition, which is obviously true. These are all pretty nuanced terms that we use in this field, and she's going to dive into that. So if I scroll down, you may have heard the name Young Age Creationist or maybe Biblical Creationist. Then again, there is chronological creationism. If I remember right, that one's termed by Stephen Lloyd over at Biblical Creation Trust, whom I've worked with before. He's a great mind on all things creationism. Also, recent creationism, and the list goes on. So you may not have heard of some of those. You might have heard of a couple of those, but basically, they're all of those terms are united by kind of a few beliefs, which is affirming a recent creation, which means within the past 10,000 years, affirming that the God of the Bible is the creator of the universe, whereas other terms, maybe like intelligent design, kind of conveys a similar meaning, that there's an intelligent mind behind the universe, but it doesn't necessarily specify which one. Creationism is not like that. Creationism says the God of the Bible. And also, this is a kind of a big one, affirming a global flood. So those are kind of the 3. It's the God of the Bible that creates the universe. He created it less than 10,000 years ago, or within the last 10,000 years. And the flood of Noah was worldwide. So, several of the reasons why we're switching up our term, and I'm going to kind of scroll through. I don't want to take away viewership of our article, so go over and read the whole article for a more in-depth breakdown. But I just wanted to bring attention to this for my own channel. But there's a couple of reasons why we might switch our term usage, and it's really subtle, but it's kind of important. And so young Earth creationism is not exactly what we want to do for a couple of reasons. For one, in our minds, if you remove the context of evolution versus creationism, 10,000 years or 6,000 years even is a long time. That's not young. That's thousands of years, right? It's short in an evolutionary mindset, but it's not short in just a general understanding, right? If someone were to live 6,000 years, which has never happened, That's a long, long time. So it just kind of depends on what context you put it. And so basically what Hannah points out here is that if we call ourselves young Earth creationists, we're defining ourselves by what we're not, because we're only young in comparison to a different view. And we don't want to define ourselves by comparing ourselves to another view. So does the term work to define who we are? It does, but it also isn't the best way to do that because, it's kind of like what atheists argue, and they're like, some of them don't even like calling themselves atheists because they're like, it's not that we don't believe in a God. It's just that like we are we don't see any evidence for it, right? And so they'll kind of make a similar argument with the word atheism, where it's like we're not a belief system. We just lack faith in a God. Like what you have when you say you have faith in a God, we don't have that. That's not a belief system in itself. And maybe I'll critique that in another video because I don't necessarily agree with that whole mindset, but you can see the idea. We don't want to define ourselves in comparison to someone else's view. We want to define ourselves, based on who we are. So that's one reason why. Another one is that we don't just believe that the Earth is less than 10,000 years old. We believe the whole universe is. So why would we call ourselves young Earth creationists when it doesn't even encompass everything that we are? There are people who would say that the universe is billions of years old, and then the Earth, from the Earth's creation, from Adam and Eve's creation, everything from there on follows a biblical chronological timeline of just a few thousand years of human history. And we're not that, right? We think the whole universe actually is less than 10,000 years old. So Hannah says people have noticed this, as in like all the confusion, all these things I just said, and they have adjusted the label to encompass a broader realm of creation. Thus, young age creationism is another term you may hear from time to time. And then she also brings up there's something called recent creationism is another one. I don't even know where that term came from. Um, then there's biblical creationism. And I think in one of my more recent videos, I talk about, are you a biblical creationist? We go through a questionnaire over whether or not we are biblical creationists. So that article from CMI uses the term biblical creationism. But that one, and I agree exactly with what Hannah says right here. She's exactly right about this. It's not a bad label, but any Christian who is convinced of theistic creationism or old earth creationism is likely to consider their own origins theory to be biblical as well. So it's not the best distinguishing term. So you don't want to call yourselves a biblical creationist as opposed to somebody who's a theistic evolutionist and thinks they are biblical as well. It's like defining ourselves as you can't just say you're biblical, right? It's like if there's a disagreement about infant baptism, I can't just be like, well, I'm a biblical Baptist because I have the right view about baptism. I have the biblical view. Well, the other side thinks they're biblical too. So why do I get to take that term? So biblical creationism is kind of a little bit of an arrogant phraseology to use there, because you're calling yourself biblical as opposed to other views, even when other views actually consider themselves biblical. It would be a good term if it was just atheistic evolution versus biblical creationism. If those were just the only two options, then sure, we can call ourselves biblical creationism because the other side does not want to call themselves biblical. They go against the Bible. But because there are positions that think of themselves as biblical and hold different views, it's probably not really efficient or polite or good natured to just say we're the biblical creationists. And then, as I said, Stephen Lloyd from the Biblical Creation Trust, a big fan of him. He has a lot of good stuff on creationism. And he came up with the term chronological creationism to try and focus in on the order of events in Genesis as opposed to the age of the earth and the age of the universe. He wants to focus on death before the fall of Adam as the most important distinguishing feature of creationists is the order of events, not just the age. Like we don't really care what the age is. We care about the order of events in Genesis, and the Genesis account gives us a timeline, and the timeline happens to be, 6 to 10,000 years old. So we don't die on the hill of age of the earth. We actually die in the hill of, Adam's sin caused death and suffering to enter into the world, and that only works really in this timeline. So yes, we're young age creationists, but maybe we should call ourselves chronological creationists because that's our hill. Our hill is sin preceded death, right? Which then preceded Christ's coming to conquer death. All right, so that's kind of a breakdown of all the terms. We at NewCreation are switching over to young age creationists for all the reasons that I've already described. I'll probably start to use young age more on the Creation Reformation channel, just because I'm not officially like associated with New Creation as Creation Reformation. They're not the same thing. But just for consistency's sake, because we're trying to push, we're intentionally saying young age because we're trying to push creationism in this direction. So it's a subtle change, but I'll probably start using young age creationists a lot more, and it's probably going to be a habit that's built because that's the terms I'm going to be using whenever I write an article for New Creation blog. I'm going to be using the words new age or young age creationist, not new age. That's a completely different thing. Okay. Here's a good question, though. So if that's young age versus young earth versus chronological creationism, what is the new creationists? What are the new creationists? And this is something I haven't discussed on my channel yet, but it's pretty important because there are a lot of different camps within creationism, a lot of different places, a lot of different corners, a lot of different subsets. And new creationism, in my opinion, is where creationism should be heading. This should be the future of creationism. And it's called the New Creationists. That term actually wasn't even coined necessarily by creationists. It could kind of date back to Paul Garner's book, The New Creationism, but then a YouTuber by the name of Joel Duff actually took the term from Paul Garner's book, and Joel Duff is not a young age creationist. He's a theistic evolutionist. And he took the new creationism and turned it into the term new creationist to describe a new group of creationists who are not like the creationism of the past. So just before I end, let's take a look at what the new creationists are. New creationism puts the emphasis on positive, scientific model building as opposed to an apologetics focus. In this context, positive refers to models that affirm creation instead of denying evolution. And you'll notice this is what I try to do with Creation Reformation. So all the materials that I have on there are usually for educating people on what the creation model is. I'm not really just debunking evolution the whole time, right? We want to build up a positive scientific model of creationism. Second, new creationism is known for not rejecting ideas simply on the basis that they are predicted or explained by the theory of evolution. Examples of this include the geological column, the theory of natural selection, and feathered dinosaurs. The reasoning here is that we should evaluate every idea based on scripture, not necessarily its intellectual provenance. And that I'm going to be talking about a lot on my channel, which is that we should not be rejecting certain principles or ideas simply because they were thought up by an evolutionist or because they were a prediction of evolution. So new creationists are more likely to accept that dinosaurs had feathers, which a lot of creationists reject simply because it looks like evolution. It looks like reptiles evolving into birds. But new creationists will say, no, we can accept that some dinosaurs had feathers without saying that dinosaurs evolved or that feathered birds evolved from dinosaurs. So, and I perfectly agree with that. I actually saw a great presentation by a couple of new creationists at one of the big creation conferences called the International Conference on Creationism. And it was Marcus Ross and Matt McLean, and they gave a talk on why it's okay to say that dinosaurs had feathers, why it's okay to say that birds are a subset of dinosaurs, they're a branch of dinosaurs. And you can say all of that without saying that birds evolved from non-avian dinosaurs. And that's something that they firmly convinced me on, so fully on board with that. But so Hannah put that, it's kind of funny. Hannah put feathered dinosaurs, which is a very hot button issue in creationism, along with the theory of a natural selection, which most creationists agree with, not all, but most will accept natural selection. So feathered dinosaurs is a more controversial issue than natural selection. And then the geologic column. There have been creationists who have known to completely reject the geological column. They say it's just made up by scientists. They put it in a textbook. Textbook is the only place it exists, doesn't exist anywhere on Earth. And while there's nowhere you can point to on Earth where the entire geological column is every single layer, we can recognize patterns across the world and put layers together and build a geologic column. And it's pretty reliable. It's pretty accurate. Creationists and evolutionists, for the most part, agree that the geologic column exists. But there are some creationists who are more apologetics minded. Again, the new creationists are not apologists. They're scientists usually. So, but the creationists who have an apologetics bent will often throw into doubt things that are generally accepted by even creation scientists, such as the existence of the geological column. So that's as far as I'll really dive into this time around. Just want to introduce you to all the different types of terms that creationists can use to describe themselves. But to be clear, young age creationist, young earth creationist, chronological creationist, recent creationist, those are all describing the same position. We pick one term out of those that we like the best to describe ourselves. At New Creation, we decided on young age creationist. We had a whole meeting about it, talked about it, decided young age creationist. Um, New creationist, though, does not mean the same thing. New creationist is a more specific category that refers to young earth creationists or young age creationists who, in addition to being creationists, also have a couple of differences with other types of creationists. For instance, the emphasis is on positive scientific model building rather than debunking evolution. And also, they are willing to accept scientific ideas proposed by the other side. And they'll accept ideas from that the evolutionists come up with. Um, and they're a little more open-minded to those ideas. They're not going to just deny it or reject it or question it simply because it comes from an evolutionary source. And I think that's the best way to go. I think that's the direction I want to take creation reformation. That's the direction I think creationists should go in the future. We're not conceding everything and just saying the evolutionists are right. We still hold to those principles that define a young age creationist, that the flood was worldwide, that the earth is less than 10,000 years old, and that God of the Bible is the creator of the universe. We hold to all of those. We just are also willing to accept scientific ideas that might even be uncomfortable for some Christians to come around to. But I mean, feathered dinosaurs being one of them, I think there's a lot of evidence that dinosaurs had feathers and that birds, like feathered birds that are still around today, those are a group that can be classified as dinosaurs. I don't find anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything in scripture that says birds can't be dinosaurs. Um, yeah, so maybe I'll dive into that for in a different video. But that's just a breakdown of the terms that we're using as we head into the new year. I'll be starting to use more of young age creationist to just kind of be in line with what our direction is over at the New Creation blog, even though, again, my movement and the New Creation blog are not the same thing. But there you go. That's kind of a breakdown. That's an explanation of the whole world of creationism. There's a lot of terms to know and keep what am I trying to say? There are a bunch of terms to know and to distinguish from one another. So I'm trying to say, and hopefully you found that helpful. And again, I kind of breezed through it really quick. There's a lot more to read up on in this article. I don't want to, like I said, just take Hannah's article and just read the whole thing on my YouTube channel. You can go and read the article for yourself. But I was just using that as kind of a foundation to go off of so I could explain what a young age creationist is and all those other terms. So thanks for joining me. Hope you enjoyed that. Stay tuned. I got a lot more planned. Again, hop over to the Creation Reformation blog. Keep tabs on the YouTube channel. I know it's been a week since I posted anything, but there will be more coming soon. So stay tuned. This is Jake Ramgren with Creation Reformation. See you next time.